I was born on February 20th, 1947 in Santa Monica in St. John's Hospital. What else?
And, well, so where were you living, or where was your family living?
Oh, my parents, well, they bought a home on, was actually at that time 1457 15th Street in Santa Monica. And when I was born, that's where they were living. And they also, the lot was a large lot. So after I was maybe about a year old or something, they built a second home on the property, and that's where I grew up. And that was a 1505 Broadway.
Okay.
It's
so
now a commercial area.
Yeah. Okay. Lots of changes.
Yeah.
We'll be going over some of that. So can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Okay. My dad, excuse me, my dad's name was Joaquin de la Peña, and he was one of 5 children born to Esteban de la Peña and Amelia Enriquez. Amelia was the daughter of Ramona Marquez and the granddaughter of Francisco Marquez, who had the land grant in Santa Monica Canyon.
So you are a descendant of the
Francisco Marquez,
the Marquez family.
Yes, on my dad's side.
And we'll get into a lot of that a bit later. But in the meantime, so your parents were, roughly when they were married?
They were married in 1934 at St. Monica's Church.
And
October 27th.
Your oldest brother was Robert.
He was born in 1935. He passed away in 2004. He owned a business on Lincoln Boulevard, Bob's Automotive Paint and Supply. Well, it was on Lincoln Boulevard first, and then when our neighborhood became commercial, my parents handed the property over to him and my sister, who was his business partner, and my sister-in-law. And they built their business on the corner of 15th and Broadway, and had it for, I don't know, 25 years or so. This
was your brother?
My brother, Robert, yes. It was called Bob's Automotive Paint and Supply. After Robert was my sister Marguerite. She was born in 1939, and she was in business with my brother. And then I'm next. And then my sister Rosemary was born in 1949. And then my youngest sister Patty, who just recently passed away, was born in 1954. My dad worked at Roger S. Marshall. It was like an automotive business. They did tires, automotive paint, all kinds of stuff. My dad worked in the tire department.
Oh, okay. So when your brother started his business,
yeah, actually, when that business closed, my brother bought the paint inventory from them, and that's how he set up. Because he worked there too before he went into the Air Force. He worked there also.
Okay, and that was sometime in the 1950s.
That was in the 50s, yeah. Late 50s, I guess. And then that particular business, Roger S. Marshall, was right across the street from my grandparents' house. So my dad used to, at lunchtime, he would go have lunch with his mother.
Oh.
It was very convenient for him.
No, but your grandfather was long gone.
Oh, yeah, he died in 1911.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned that he's actually buried in...
He's buried in Santa Monica Canyon in the Marquez family cemetery. And he came from Mexico in 1894. And that's a whole long story about him. But anyway, he worked on the Long Wharf when starting in 1895.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, when that started petering out, he was the manager of a pool hall on Utah, I think, which is now Broadway.
Okay.
It was McNeary's Pool Hall, and I found out that when I was doing research on the family, I found him in a Santa Monica directory.
Oh, great!
And he was the manager of this pool hall, which is kind of interesting because he was a Mexican immigrant. I don't know how he wound up being the manager of a pool hall, but somehow he did it. There were 5 kids in my dad's family.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned your mother is also Mexican immigrant.
My mother was born in Mexico. She was born in Gomez Palacios, Durango. And when she was 2 years old, her father abandoned my grandmother and her. And my grandmother, it was during the Mexican Revolution. And he was not a very good guy. Anyway, he abandoned them. So my grandmother took my mother, and they went back to Chihuahua, which is where my grandmother was from. She was born in the city of Chihuahua, Chihuahua. Chihuahua is the capital of Chihuahua.
Okay.
So that's where my grandmother was from. So they went back there and lived with with my grandmother's mother. So, And then in 1919, they came to the United States. Because by that time, the Mexican Revolution, they had this is kind of my reading into the whole thing. Because my grandmother was a very staunch Catholic, and in 1917, the new Constitution of Mexico was very anti-Catholic, and that's when they started outlawing the priests from, wearing clerical garb, and they started closing the churches, and they actually started killing priests. So I think that's why my grandma wanted to get out of there.
Okay.
Plus, they had already lived through the revolution, and my grandma used to tell us that on their way to church in the morning, they'd have to walk over dead bodies. So, and then there were people on the roof shooting, all night long. So you can imagine. So anyway, they went to El Paso, Texas, because my grandmother's three brothers were already there. So they went and stayed. They all lived together for several years, and then they came to California in the 1920s.
Your grandmother, your mother and her mother came together.
Yes, my mother was an only child.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. My grandmother never remarried.
Okay, and I'm curious. Did you speak Spanish growing up?
Well, my parents both spoke Spanish at home because they didn't want us to know what they were talking about. But I was a very quiet child, and I picked it up. They didn't know that, but I did. And Marguerite and my brother Robert, they grew up speaking Spanish before they spoke English. But by the time I came along, everybody was speaking English. So, but when my parents talked at the dinner table, they spoke in Spanish. But I wound up, learning it from them.
So that was sort of their...
They didn't realize that till years later.
Their code language.
Yeah.
So you picked it up on your own. Did you learn it in school?
Oh, I learned it in school too, but I picked it up just because I was curious.
You listened.
I wanted to know what they were talking about. So, and then plus my grandmother spoke Spanish most of the time.
Yeah. Are you fluent in Spanish yourself?
No, not fluent. I can understand it completely, but when I go to speak it, because I don't think in Spanish, so I have to really think about what I'm going to say. So that slows things down.
Yeah.
But I can read it, and it just helped with the research. So.
Certainly, yeah.
Well, I went to St. Anne's School. We're Catholic. Went to St. Anne's School here in Santa Monica, 1st through 8th grade, and then St. Monica's from, 4 years.
Okay.
Excuse me. And then I had a period of time when after that I was really mixed up when I was a teenager. So I had a period of floundering around, and I started working at UCLA for a while, and then I got tired of that, and I went to court reporting school. I thought I was going to do that, and that petered out. Then I became a paralegal. I took the... Okay.
So you graduated from St. Monica's.
Yes.
There was a period of time, at some point you went to work at UCLA.
Yeah, and then I was there for 7.5 years, and then I got antsy.
And then
I went to the court reporting. I was on jury duty, and I started getting kind of fascinated with the court reporter, and I thought, maybe I should do that. So there was a court reporting school here in Santa Monica on Ocean Park Boulevard for a while, so I went there. That didn't pan out too well. So then from there I went and got my paralegal certificate from UCLA Extension, and then that didn't work out so well either. And then my dad said to me, listen, by that time I was in my early 30s. My dad said, you better get a job or you're going to get a pension, because obviously I was not married. So so he said, you better go back to UCLA. And thank God I took his advice, because I didn't always. But my dad was pretty smart. So I went back to UCLA, got a job, and I was there for 31 years before I retired.
And the first time you went to UCLA, what were you doing?
Secretarial stuff.
And then it was...
Second time, when I first went there, when I went back when I was 35, I was working for a pediatric ophthalmologist, surgeon. And so I was not running the office, but I was doing the insurance billing, making the appointments, all that kind of thing. And doing a lot of his personal stuff too. And then, so I was there 4 years, and I transferred to the North Campus. I was tired of working for doctors, frankly. So I went back, I went up, I was very lucky to get this job in the the dean's office at the College of Letters and Science. So I worked for the social science dean, and then as time went on, and new bosses, I got transferred to working for life science dean, physical science dean, humanities dean, and then fortunately I went back to social sciences because that's what I preferred. So when I retired, I had been there I was 27 years in the College of Letters and Science, 4 years at Jill Stein. So
great. When did you leave UCLA then?
2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's about 6 years ago.
So it's gone by really fast because when I was working, it wasn't going by that fast. Okay, so while I was working at UCLA, how did that start? Oh, okay, well, I was in a relationship that didn't pan out. and I'm gay. So the last thing that my girlfriend said to me was, "You never finish anything you start." So of course that really hit me. So I had started writing a novel before I knew her. And then, so I thought, okay, I'm going to finish this thing and I'm going to see if I get it published. So I started writing it again. And then I was subscribing to some feminist publications, and I saw a little ad in one of them that there was a writer's workshop for women in Eugene, Oregon. And it was like a 1-week thing, and they were encouraging women of color to apply for a scholarship. So I did, and I got it. So I went off for a week to Oregon, and I had,
what year was that?
That was 88.
Oh.
88. Yeah, I think it was 88. It was either 88 or 89. It must have been 88. Okay, so by that time, my dad had passed away. He died in 86. And so I was kind of in this in-between spot, and I thank God I got that scholarship. So anyway, so I went for a week, and I had my first draft, and part of the workshop, you had to read something that you were working on. So I read a chapter, and it turns out a woman from Seal Press in Seattle. Seal Press was a feminist press at that time. And she came up to me afterwards, and she said, "We want to see it when you're finished." So I almost fell over. So she would stay in touch with me, So anyway, that was 88, because in 89 I sent her, she lived in Oakland, I sent her the completed manuscript because she said, "Send it to me and I'll submit it for you." So I did. Well, it turns out that was when the earthquake happened up in Santa Cruz. So everything in her living room fell all over. My manuscript was buried under all kinds of stuff. So anyway, I didn't hear from her for a while, and I was freaking out. Well, it turns out that that's what happened, but they accepted it. I mean, I had to obviously do a lot of editing and whatever, but they did accept it, and it was published. It was finally published in 1992.
1992.
And it was called Margins.
Margins.
Yes. So that was my first novel. So I was doing that while I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I got to do a lot of book promotion and travel and stuff like that. Because, they would give me a little travel money, not a lot, but but it was, it was a good experience.
Yeah, great. And you ended up writing how many novels?
3 altogether. And then I co-wrote a children's book, also, alphabet book.
Okay.
And so the last novel was published in 1999. And then at that point I went through another breakup, and that was like kind of a big mess, and I kind of lost my incentive to do anything. Oh. And plus I was really busy at work, so I just thought, okay, I'm going to concentrate on work and just work on my career, because I'm going to retire eventually, and I want to have a good pension, because it depends on how much money you're making. So I did that, and then my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2004. So I was working full time, and then I was helping out with her Monday, Wednesday, Friday after work. We had a full-time nurse for her. And so my sisters and I were alternating nights. And so we did that for 6 years, and she passed away in 2010. By that time, I wasn't, working on fiction anymore, because I had met a whole bunch of my cousins at the Marquez family cemetery, and I decided to help out with the research.
Ah, okay.
So that's how that all happened. So it was just this progression from one thing to the next, and kind of just by chance, some of it.
Yeah.
It was I wasn't planned.
Right. Well, life presents itself.
Yeah, and you just sort of have to take up what, where it falls,
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's get into that then.
Okay.
That was it 2009?
2009, there was an article in the LA Times about Ernest Marquez trying to, I don't know what word, restore the cemetery, the cemetery in Santa Monica Canyon, which, we all knew about. My dad used to take us down there every so often because my grandfather's buried there. My grandfather, De La Peña, who worked on the Long Wharf, he's buried there. And he has the only original tombstone left. And that was because when he was here in Santa Monica, he he was a founding member of this organization called Alianza Hispanoamericana, and it was a mutual aid society. So people paid dues, and then if they got sick or if they died or whatever, the association would pay for their burial and their tombstone. So that's why he has a tombstone, and on the tombstone it says AHA at the top, which I looked into. I found out about this, when I did research, I found out about this organization that was founded in Arizona in the mines. So I don't know if he, because rumor has it, and I've never been able to prove it, rumor has it that he did work in the mines for a while before he came to California, but he was only 22 when he came to California, so I don't know how true that is. But he did have a lung condition, which could have been emphysema, it could have been who knows what. But he died in 1911, and he was only 38. Or 39, 38 or 39.
Okay. I mean, it does sound like...
So he had something, and I don't know, so stevedores also could get this asbestos-related stuff. And, and since he worked on the Long Wharf, he could have gotten it from that, too. So anything's possible.
Sure.
But I know it was... people used to say it was TB, but nobody else in the family got sick, so that's why I think it was, COPD or emphysema or something.
Okay. Can we talk just a little bit about the Marquez family cemetery and the fact that it began, the Marquez family, multiple generations were living in the Santa Monica Canyon, which was the original land grant.
Right.
And so it was a natural thing to have
Right.
a family burial plot
Yeah,
there.
because before that, they got the land grant in 1839. And Francisco Marquez came from Mexico in 1825. 1825. He came to the Pueblo of Los Angeles. And he was a blacksmith. And he had a blacksmith shop on the plaza, but he also went from ranch to ranch, as needed. And so he and his partner, Isidro Reyes, who was the son of one of the mayors of L.A., the grandson of one of the mayors of L.A., Isidro also, they became friends, and together they applied for the land grant, and they got it in 1839. So, so the Marquez family, it was 6,656 acres, and the Marquez family lived on it. And they had Francisco and his wife, Maria Roque Valenzuela, they had 11 children, and 5 survived. So, my great-grandmother, Ramona, was one of the youngest daughter who survived. There were others after her, but they didn't live. And so what was your question?
Well, I was sort of trying to get back to that point in 2009 because obviously Santa Monica Canyon has been developed.
Right. Okay. So anyway, Pascual Marquez, who was the youngest surviving son, and he's Ernie Marquez's grandfather. He started the cemetery because before that, people were buried in the plaza, outside the Plaza Church in downtown LA. But then, that graveyard became full really quick, and then the Calvary Cemetery started, and I think in East LA, and so, but so the Marquez family is way over here, so they started burying people on their property, and so a lot of people, I think there were over 30. Or maybe close to 40 people buried there. Wasn't that many, because it's not a real big piece of land. But anyway, so in 2009, the LA Times had an article about Ernie restoring the cemetery, and so a friend of mine called me at work. I hadn't seen the paper yet because I used to read it at lunchtime. So a friend of mine called me in the morning, and she said, "Have you seen the LA Times yet?" And I said, "No." And she said, there's an article about your cousin. So so I looked, at lunchtime I read it, and so I emailed the woman who wrote the article, and I can't remember her name right off the bat, but anyway, I emailed her, and she forwarded my email to Ernie, and then Ernie invited me to come down on, I think it was January 31st. It was in the late part of January anyway, of 2009. He said, we're going to have cadaver dogs come out here because we're going to find exactly where the bodies are. And a lot of people are going to come down, so come down. So I had met him I hadn't met him in person until like when his Santa Monica Beach book came out.
Okay.
Which was in 2000 something. But in the 90s, I'm getting a little bit off track, but anyway, in the 90s, my brother told me that Ernest Marquez was trying to get people to donate to the cemetery because they were going to start working on it. Now, so I don't remember, it was sometime in the 90s. So my brother, I think, found out from Isidro Reyes, one of our cousins. So anyway, so my brother gave me Ernie's address, and so I started sending him checks. I would send him, $50 every few months. And so anyway, I was glad I did that because I had a relationship with him, even though I hadn't met him. And so when they went to that was when they got it landmarked.
In the 90s?
No, well, it was either the 90s
around
or
2000?
the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah.
So when they had written up a report about the history of the cemetery, and because I had been donating, I got a copy because not everybody did. So I was really happy to get that. So Ernie sent it to me. And so anyway, so I had this relationship with Ernie even though I hadn't met him. So then I met him when his book came out because I went to Santa Monica Library when he gave his talk, and I introduced myself and all that. So he knew who I was. I knew who he was. But like I hadn't grown up knowing him. Okay. So, which is weird. But, my dad's family was kind of hot and cold with people. So my dad was very shy.
Oh.
So all of them were. All of the De La Peñas were really shy.
It's hot and cold with even members of the extended clan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was very odd.
Huh?
So, and I have a feeling it was because, their dad died when they were kids. And like I said, he had whatever this respiratory problem was, he had a really bad cough. Our grandfather, and people would avoid them. My dad would say that people would run the other way when they saw them coming. So I think that really affected the kids, and because my dad and his brothers were just, boy, they were quiet guys, really quiet guys.
How many brothers did he have?
He had 2 brothers.
Okay.
There's a picture of one. See that picture down there? On the right side, lower right. No, this one next to you. Yeah, that's them standing in front of the house.
Okay. We'll get you up to getting some of these.
My dad had an older brother and a younger brother, but they were really quiet, except if they had a few drinks. but anyway, so getting back to what was I saying about?
Well, we were how you got involved in this.
Okay, so then, like I said, I went down to the cemetery the day that the cadaver dogs were there,
and I think also what was going on was this dispute with a property owner.
That was later.
Oh, that was later.
Okay, that was a little later, a few years later. So anyway, my cousin Joe Payton, who's retired LAPD lieutenant, and I didn't know him either. But anyway, because he was, a former cop, he knew who to call. He lives in Newhall, so he knew who to call, and so these guys were Ventura County forensic dog team came down, and we were all talking to everybody in the cemetery, and then they kind of threw us out because the dogs were going to go to work. And, it couldn't be a distraction. So we were in the outer part of the cemetery, and the dogs were, you couldn't really see them because of the wall, but they were busy in there. So then when all that was done, because there was a whole bunch of cousins who I'd never even met before. Some of them I knew, but not too many. So then we all went back into the cemetery, and my cousin Joe Payton, I didn't know he was my cousin at the time, he was talking to the Ventura County guys. And I said to my older sister, Marguerite, I said, who is that guy? He knows so much about the family. Because I was listening. I said, he really knows a lot about the family. But, he looked like this just, white guy with long hair. And I was like, who is he? So anyway, my sister said, go find out who he is, Terry. So I went and stood next to him until he finally stopped talking. And then I just introduced myself, and he said, oh, well, we were wondering if any De La Peñas were going to show up. And I said, well, yeah, my grandfather's right over there. And he goes, well, we're cousins. I almost fell over because it's like, who are you? But anyway, he's also a descendant of Pascual Marquez, like Ernie is. And Pascual was my great-grandmother Ramona's brother, her little brother. Oh. So that's how we're connected.
Okay.
So Ernie's grandfather and my great-grandmother were siblings.
Okay.
And Pascual, Ernie's grandfather, is Joe's great-great-grandfather. Joe's great-grandmother was Pascual's daughter, and she married a Creole. So it's very complicated. But anyway, Joe is my cousin, and I was just shocked because I just looked at him and I thought, who is this guy? But anyway, so then I started helping Joe eventually because I was still working at the time, and so he told me that he was working on the genealogy stuff, and I said, wow, that's what I wanted to do when I retired. And he goes, well, you want to help me? And I said, sure, but I'm still working. And he says, well, can you read Spanish? And I said, yes. And he said, you're in.
Great.
So,
does he read Spanish?
No.
Aha.
I mean, he can kind of read it, but
okay.
It's not that hard because the documents I'm talking about, birth documents and marriage documents, it's pretty much the same language. It's like legalese.
Yeah.
Once you can pretty much figure it out.
Well, that's fascinating. So since 2009, basically you've been working with your cousin Joe on
off and on, yeah.
Yeah, off and on, researching the family history
and we did our DNA in 2012.
Oh.
And that was his idea because he wanted to be sure that our research was right because he was pretty sure we were Sephardic on the Marquez side, and yeah.
Okay.
But on my mother's side, I'm Ashkenazi, which is even crazier because my mom was, long time. My grandmother, my mom was born in Durango, but that was because her parents moved there after they got married. But my grandmother and my great-grandmother and all of my grandmother's side, they've been in Chihuahua for centuries. So I don't know where the Ashkenazi came from, but it's Eastern European. And
so you're basically, you have a Jewish heritage.
On my mom's side, and on my dad's side, it's Sephardic.
Okay.
So I've got both sides. It was a big shock.
Well, I mean, so...
Well, it shouldn't have been a shock, really, because, the Jews had to go somewhere when they got kicked out of Spain, so...
Exactly. So I'm curious, when you had this, you said you had the DNA done. What was that process?
Family Tree DNA, it was the first, I believe it was the first of the big companies that were doing it, and they're based in Houston. And there's a book called From the Ends of the Earth, and it's about the Jews of New Mexico, because, I don't know if you realized, there was a Mexican Inquisition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, Spanish Inquisition was also going on.
But when the Jews escaped from Spain and went to Mexico, then there was a Mexican Inquisition. So a lot of those Jews left Mexico City and went north, and they wound up in New Mexico. I mean, over a period of time. They went to different parts of Mexico, but a lot of them wound up in New Mexico. And so they were very isolated there, so they were able to, practice. So there's this book called From the Ends of the Earth, and I'm not remembering the author right now, but it's all about the Jews of New Mexico. And so a lot of those people they talk in that book about the DNA stuff. Okay, so I think that's how we found out, or maybe Joe did research on his own, I can't remember. But anyway, we chose that company. And so I did mine. We tried to get people from each family, but it wasn't. We weren't very successful because it's not cheap. So Joe did it. I did it. I got my nephew to do it because I wanted. I did the maternal from my mom, and my brother had already passed away, so he had a son, Greg. So we needed Greg because he's the only De La Peña male, now at all, so in our side of the family. So I got Greg to do it. And then my cousin Sharon did it, her son did it, and a few other cousins. But a bunch of us did it all at once, and then when people started seeing our results, and they started doing it too. So we had, I don't remember how many people altogether, maybe 10.
Wow.
So we've got all these different, phases of the family and stuff. So, but anyway, a lot of our connections on the Marquez side were New Mexico, because there was a Marquez guy who went to New Mexico, and they were Jewish. Well, anyway, so that's how we found out that Marquez connection went. But there was also other families in New Mexico that we were connected to, which we had no idea that there was a connection, but there is. Because a lot of those New Mexicans came to California in the 1840s, and we're related to them.
I wonder what the motivation...
It was trade.
Trade?
Yeah, the Santa Fe Trail and all
that. Sure.
Mm-hmm. It was before way before statehood.
Yeah, 1846 was...
the war.
Yes, the United States invading.
Before that.
So they were already on the move to California.
Yeah. These guys, these two, William Workman, do you know about that?
Was he the guy that was going to take over, was going to start an empire?
No, that's Walker, I think.
Walker, sorry.
William Workman was actually, they were originally from St. Louis. And then they were traders in Taos. I think it was David Workman and William Workman and their partner, John Rowland. Well, anyway, I can't remember why they left New Mexico, but they did. And then they came to L.A. and they had a land grant. So do you know about the Homestead Museum?
No.
It's out in City of Commerce area out there.
Okay.
That was the Workman Ranch.
Okay.
He got a land grant. He married into. Anyway, they were New Mexicans, and so we're connected to them. I don't remember exactly how, but.
And that was all even before the Mexican War.
Oh yeah. Which
resulted in California becoming United States territory.
Yeah, California, New Mexico,
in 1848.
Arizona, parts of Texas, Utah, Nevada, all that.
Yeah.
It was huge.
Yeah, big chunk.
Yeah. 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 So all of the Marquez family, all the land grant people, they became citizens by default, by conquest.
Right.
And at that time, the choice was, which really wasn't a choice, was like, go back to Mexico or stay here and become automatic U.S. citizens. Well, they weren't going to go back to Mexico because they'd been here for a long time.
They had land.
Yeah, they were born here and everything, so they weren't going to go back. So that's how that happened. And then they had to prove that the land was theirs, which was very complicated.
Yeah, that sort of gets, I'm not that familiar with, but that gets into that whole period when the United States was setting up verification of land grants.
Plus,
and
then it got complicated with the gold rush, and
Well, that that just changed everything.
That, yeah. So yeah.
Okay, let's see, because we're getting into. Well into
yeah, we're kind of rambling
family.
around.
Well, that's the way these things go. But you let's see. Yeah,
I wanted to talk about the women.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's get into that. Okay. I was just gonna, before we leave, how you got into it with Joe. Mm-hmm. Had you done a lot of research into the family history before that?
No, I just my dad would, like I said, my dad would give us bits and pieces. So-and-so's related to us. I'm like, how, Daddy? I don't know. They're related to us. We're cousins. You got cousins all over the place. Mm-hmm. And he would even say, you've got these redheaded cousins. I'm like, well, who are they? Where are they? Well, anyway, I met some of them that day at the cemetery in 2009. And they're on my Enriquez side. Ramona Marquez's, second family. Well, it's very complicated, but anyway, her the man that she got involved with, then Ramona had a son named Luis Enriquez, and he married a lady named Rose Kilgore, and she was a redhead. So that's where all those people, the Kilgore side, And William Kilgore, was a Confederate who wound up living in Santa Monica Canyon. He was a beekeeper. And Manuel Marquez, who was the oldest brother, invited him to stay. So he had daughters, and they all married. Well, not all of them, but a couple of them married into the family.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, so they're the Kilgore side. So I've got these cousins who are, from that side of the family, and they're the redheads. Green eyes and everything. So that was a mind blower, because I thought, well, okay, I've heard about these people, but I never knew who they were.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much interconnected. And so, like, your redhead cousins are all still local people? Some
of them, yeah. There's some in Culver City, West LA.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you wanted to talk about the women.
Yeah, okay. So in the course of doing our research, we found out that we have roots in Baja California. And this is on the side of Francisco Marquez's wife, Maria Roque Valenzuela. Her maternal line is from Baja California. And one of her great-grandfathers, can't remember exactly how far, but anyway, his name was Francisco Graziano, and he was a casta, which means that he had African blood. And he worked for the Jesuits. He was born in Loreto, which at that time was the capital of Baja. And he was born in around 1705. And so that's pretty much what we know about him. And he's written up in, I have a book, it's on the table over there, but it's called Antigua, California, and it's about the history of Baja. And it was written by a man named Harry Crosby. And there's a list in the back of the book, and it's called The Founding Peninsular Families, and Francisco's in the list. And a lot of our people, the Carrillos are in there, the Higueras. The Higuera family had the ranch Rincon de los Bueyes, which is part of Culver City. Their family is from Baja. And there's one De La Peña on that list. And so when I was in Baja, and I was in San Jose del Cabo in 2016, Joe and I and some other cousins, we went down to, we took a cruise down there. And so when we were in San Jose del Cabo, when we were in Loreto, we had a really good tour guide, and we went into the museum, and the De La Peña names all over the place. And I was just like, wow. And so I was telling the tour guide, and he said, well, yeah, they were like royalty down here. They were very wealthy. And they are related to my other De La Peñas. We found this out by doing the research. So they're connected. I'm not real close. It's way, way back. But I have those roots too. Yeah, sorry about the noise.
I think that's
It's a street cleaner.
Oh, the street cleaners.
Yeah.
Because it's street cleaning day.
Turn it off, or?
No.
Okay. So anyway, Francisco Graziano, like I said, he worked for the Jesuits were the missionaries to Baja. And so and Loreto was the capital, and the church, we actually got to go to the church where Francisco was baptized, and it's still standing. It was built in 1699. So that was like a mind blower to be there. Francisco
Graziano.
Yeah, and we think he had that name because the Jesuits who were in Baja, a lot of them were Italian. Because Graziano is an Italian name. So he, like I said, he's mixed race. We're not sure. We don't know who his parents were, but he married a native woman named Maria Luna. And then they had a son named Antonio. And he married a woman named Maria Isadora Marquez. And we're not sure if there are Marquezes or not, but I told you it's going to rain.
I mean, this is fascinating because it can be very confusing without having written out in front of you. So can you remind me quickly again, your grandparents on your father's side were Esteban de la Peña and
Amelia Enriquez.
Mm-hmm. Who
Ramona Marquez was her mother.
And Ramona Marquez was her mother.
I'll show you the picture.
Okay.
It's on the other side of the sofa.
And Ramona Marquez was
Francisco's daughter.
Was daughter of Francisco, who got the
land grant. Yes. She was born in 1842. And so she was 8 years old when he died. He died in 1850. And I think that really affected her because, I mean, I have no way of knowing for sure, but I mean, she was only 8 years old and her mother remarried really fast, which was very...
Was that
made
common?
me raise my eyebrows when I found out. He died in December of 1850, and I think it was in May of 1851 she remarried, and she married the blacksmith of the ranch. His name is Anselmo Garcia. And it was very interesting. But anyway, I've met some of the Garcia cousins, and so when I met them, actually Joe found out about them, and then one of them, Mercedes Garcia, wanted to come down here because she had never been to the cemetery. So I'm really getting off track here, but
that's
it's
okay.
Very interesting. But anyway, her father, who's also named Anselmo, they don't read Spanish. They don't know Spanish. They look real white because all of them married white women. So they're all, their last name is Garcia, and they've got names like Anselmo, Mercedes, but they look as white as can be. They came down here a couple years ago, and Joe said, Terry, they're coming to Santa Monica. You got to meet them. And I said, well, are you going to come down? He goes, no, you're going to do it. So anyway, I sent them a picture of me, so they would know what I look like. So we met them at California Pizza Kitchen for lunch. And it turned out to be, I was with my sister Marguerite and I, it turned out to be the day that they were paving the road that goes down through Santa Monica Canyon, Entrada.
Yeah.
They were paving it, so we couldn't drive down there. We walked down the stairs, the 4th Street stairs. We found parking on 4th and something, and then we walked down the stairs, and then we went up Entrada to San Lorenzo, and then to the cemetery. So it was a walk. I mean, I was tired, and I thought, this poor man, his knees are going to kill him. But anyway, we got there, and I have a key to the cemetery, so we went in. But anyway, so before that, when we were at lunch with him, I was hoping that he would clarify some stuff about the Garcias. I didn't want to ask too many questions because there's a lot of rumors that Anselmo Garcia was a counterfeiter. So I didn't even bring it up. He brought it up. He goes, well, he was a counterfeiter, don't you? And I said, well, I've heard the stories. And he said, yeah, you know what he used to do? And I said, no, what did he do? Well, I mean, this sounds so crazy, but I just couldn't believe it. But anyway, you know how they have these fancy saddles and stuff with the silver? And he would take the silver off and he melted down and he made coins. I don't even know how that's possible. But anyway, he got arrested. And the rumor is that he went to Yuma Territorial Prison, but I don't know.
What year would that have been?
Oh, well, like I said, he married my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother in 1851, so it was after that. Because the marriage they had a few kids, but I think they had 4 kids. And then he was out of the picture. So that was verified for me because we had always heard those rumors.
That's fascinating.
So it was very fascinating. But anyway, they were thrilled to go to the cemetery because they had heard about it, and they have a lot of relatives buried there because I don't know if you know about the botulism story.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, some of the people who died in that food poisoning incident was on New Year's Eve of 1909.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was 1909. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because when we were doing all the cemetery stuff, it was the 100th anniversary. That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so they were thrilled because now there's a big tile plaque in the cemetery that Ernie commissioned, and a lot of us donated money for that. And it's tile and it has the names of all the people that we've researched and found out who's there. So the Garcias are in there. I've got a picture on my phone if you want to see it.
Of the plaque.
The plaque, yeah. It's a really pretty tile.
Yeah.
Has misspellings in it, unfortunately.
Well. And how many people died in that botulism poisoning? Was it a dozen?
Around, yeah. I think they're 12 or 13.
A lot of them children.
Yeah, and Ramona Marquez's last guy. I don't like to call him her husbands because they're a common law. But anyway, he's in one of these pictures.
Okay.
He was one of the ones who died. But Ramona had already died.
Oh,
she died in 1900, and he died in the botulism thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was horrible. It was canned peaches.
Yeah.
that apparently the I don't know, however they did the process, it wasn't sanitary or whatever, but
somebody made a mistake.
Somebody made a mistake and they all died. Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, the kind of tragedies people have had.
Oh yeah.
In past generations are.
But that's a family story that everybody knows,
right?
One way or another.
Yeah.
You know, because it was such a big deal. I mean, my cousin Sharon Reyes. Her father knew one of the founders of Santa Monica Hospital, which I can't remember his name at the time, but anyway, he had written up that doctor had written up a history of Santa Monica Hospital, and it's in there because it was one of the biggest tragedies. That doctor was involved in, trying to save everybody's life, but he couldn't do it.
Yeah. That was St. John's Hospital.
Santa Monica.
Or Santa Monica.
Yeah, St. John's was built in the 40s.
Oh, okay.
1940s.
So that
Santa
was
Monica was already
the one hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking St. Monica's church was where they had the funeral.
Yeah, and then they went down the hill, down to down Entrada and to. Yeah. My dad used to tell that story when he was a little boy because he was 6, but my dad was born in 1903, so he was 6 years old because he always remembered it. He used to tell us that the widows or the mothers of the kids or whoever would try to throw themselves into the grave, and everybody was hysterical and crying. It was just horrible.
Yeah.
Because, they lost all those. And then they buried them in a trench. They just built one big, and then you can see it at the cemetery because Ernie has now put up crosses and stuff where that actual, the dogs found it, the forensic dogs found it, where the bodies are, and they're just all like in a kind of diagonal.
One thing I've noticed when I kind of look at some of the ages and the dates of marriages and whatnot, it seemed common that a lot older men were marrying younger women.
Yeah. Yeah, when Ramona Marquez got married in 1857, she was 15. And her mother, I think, was pretty young too. I can't remember how old she was when she married Francisco Marquez, but she was much younger than him. So, because he was supposedly, we'd never been able to really find his baptismal record, which is weird, but everything I've ever read about him, it says he was born in 1798 and he died in 1850, and she was born in Roque, his wife, was born in 1815, and she was quite a bit younger. He was
in his 30s when they married.
I think he was 34, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You made a remark to me the other day that Francisco Marquez is a bit of a mystery man.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, because he came to California in 1825, and when they got married, they have what I can't remember what they call it, where they have this inquiry into, who's getting married, and it's actually written up, where the priest is asking, like, have you been married before, blah, blah, blah. This is before the ceremony, apparently. I don't know if it's the same day or if it's beforehand.
It's like a background check?
Yeah, like a background check. And so people in the Pueblo would say, oh yeah, we've known him since he's been here, or we grew up with him, and they're from Mexico. And but anyway, when he got married, he said he was from Villa de Leon, Guanajuato. But when we were doing, all these Marquez connections that we have with the DNA, they're all Jalisco. And then when Francisco Marquez, he was a godfather to several children, as years went on. So if you look at the Plaza records, he says that he's from San Juan de los Lagos, which is Jalisco. So it's like he didn't keep his story straight, So that's why I'm saying, I don't know what the deal is with him. We've never been able to find out. But we do know that these Marquez people that we're connected to by DNA are from Jalisco. And some of them are from San Juan de los Lagos and other towns in that area, because I've looked at the map and they're all kind of in a little cluster. Getting back to, God, I'm going all over the place.
That's all right.
But going back to the Gracianos.
Okay.
Okay, so Francisco's son Antonio married that, Maria Isadora Marquez.
We're back in Baja.
Yeah. And then they had a daughter named Maria Teresa Graziano, which is my name. Mary Teresa. I just loved it when I found that out. I thought, okay, now I like my name because I don't really like it. So Maria Teresa Graziano was Antonio's daughter, and she married a man named Pedro Alvarez, and he was a Yaqui Indian. He was from the Yaqui River area. The Yaqui thing is a whole other story, but Pedro wound up, Pedro Alvarez, they married her, and they wound up in San Diego, and they're in the 1790 census, and it says that he's from the Rio Yaqui area, and it says color quebrado, which means broken color, so that means mixed race, and that she was from Baja. Okay, so he was a soldier at Presidio San Diego in the 1790s. And they wound up, coming to LA eventually. But at that time, he was a soldier. And then, so then they had a daughter named Maria Josefa Alvina Alvarez. And she married the son of one of the original pobladores from LA, Basilio Rosas' son, and his name was Juan Esteban Rosas. And so Maria Josefa Alvina married him, and then they had one child, Jose Antonio, I think. And I think I don't know, 18 months or something after that baby was born, Juan Esteban Rosas died. So then she was a widow, young widow. And then my great-great-great-grandfather, Jose Manuel Valenzuela, who was also a soldier, he was at Presidio Santa Barbara, but he had come with the military escort that brought the pobladores to Los Angeles. The original settlers. And he was in that military contingent, and they helped them get settled. And then most of the military went up to establish Presidio Santa Barbara. So he was in the original Presidio. But then he was married to a woman named Maria Concepcion Higuera, and then they had kids. And then when she died, he retired from the military. He came back to LA, and he married Maria Josefa Alvina Alvarez. So he was a widower, she was a widow, and they got married, and then they had a bunch of kids. And Maria Roque Valenzuela was their youngest, and she's the one that married Francisco Marquez. So your family roots aren't just back to Francisco Marquez, who came here in 1825. Oh, way before
they
that.
Go back to
and I didn't know that.
The original settlers of Los Angeles.
Right, yeah, they're all connected, and they were rich. They were Baja people, but the Valenzuela side, he was from Villa de Sinaloa, which is Mexico, mainland. Baja's a peninsula, so they're from all over. And then Francisco Marquez and Maria Roque Valenzuela, when they had their kids, like I said, their youngest surviving daughter was my great-grandmother, Ramona Marquez. And her first marriage was to a man named Carlos Baker. Well, Charles Baker, but sometimes he's called Carlos. He's another mystery man. We've never been able to find out. There's a million Charles Bakers if you try to do research. But they got married in 1857. She was 15. And they had a son named Jose Antonio Baker. And so in the 1860 census, he's out of the picture. Maria Ramona's living with her aunt, Manuela Valenzuela, who's Roque Valenzuela's sister, who never married. So Ramona's living with her and the baby. And then, so sometime during the 1860s, she hooked up with Jose Rudecindo Enriquez, who was my great-grandfather. And they had 4 kids. The first one died. His name was Agustin. He died. And then they had Luis Enriquez, who's the one who married the Kilgore lady, and those are the redheads. And then the second one was Maria Delfina, and she married a man named Pedro Badillo, who was a real colorful character. And then the third one was my grandmother Amelia, and she married Esteban de la Peña. But Mr. Enriquez, Jose Rudecindo Enriquez, my great-grandfather, he was from Sonora. And he came to California sometime in the 1850s. You know, during the gold rush, a lot of those miners were from Sonora.
The original,
but a lot of them, when they realized, you know, that everything was already being taken up in California, up in the gold rush country, a lot of them never even got there because they figured, oh, what's the point, you know?
I think actually they were among the first to get to the gold fields.
But none of them, they were the, you know, like. Joaquin Murrieta, that whole bandit story, he was apparently from Sonora too. But anyway, so the Enriquez family, it was real interesting when I was looking at the Plaza records, and the reason how I got into the Plaza records is another researcher had typed them up, printed them out, you know, and gave a copy to Joe Payton, and he gave it to me. So it's only certain years. But anyway, the Enriquez family was in California in the 1850s, and they were godparents to a bunch of kids. That's how I found, you know, my great-grandfather, Reducindo Enriquez, and he had sisters, and they're all in there. They, you know, and it says that they were from Sonora in the baptismal records. So anyway, he wound up with Ramona Marquez, and you know, they had, like I said, they had my grandmother and her siblings, and then he wound up marrying a younger woman. Marrying her, you know, he didn't marry my great-grandmother. Married her. Married her. And
okay.
So I don't know whatever happened to him after that. He's been hard to trace. But
wow.
But he did marry somebody else.
I had a quick question. For example, you mentioned a bit ago about the 1790 census in San Diego. Mm-hmm. That obviously was not the USA census. That would have been
like the Presidio census.
The Kingdom of Spain.
Yeah, Spain. Yeah. Yeah, so going back to my great-grandmother Ramona, so after, Baker was out of the picture, and then Enriquez was out of the picture because he wound up marrying somebody else. So then she wound up with a man named Guadalupe Reyes, who was the son of Isidro Reyes, who was Francisco Marquez's partner. So his name was Guadalupe, and he's in the picture behind you.
Okay.
But he was a really good guy, and he's one of the ones who died in the botulism thing. You know?
Oh.
So they had several children. Now this is what's real interesting about, you know, my dad not telling us stuff, because I don't think he wanted us to know that Ramona was going pretty much from man to man. But I think she kind of had no choice. You know, I mean, she did have her own money from the land grant. You know, she got her own money. And my grandmother, you know, after my grandfather died in 1911, because I asked my dad one time, I said, well, wait a minute, how did we called her Nanita, my grandma. I said, how did Nanita, you know, support you kids? And he said, she sold land.
Okay.
And she got it from her mother. So they had property in Santa Monica, and you know, as they were running out of money, they'd sell it. And then when my dad and his brothers grew up, they supported their mom. So my grandmother never remarried. She's like one of the few who didn't remarry. So
that's an interesting aspect to. There were so many people that inherited from the original land grant, and the land kept getting subdivided, and then people would simply sell off the land. Yeah, like,
you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, because people in my family have even said, you know, our land got stolen, and it wasn't stolen. It wasn't stolen. The Marquez family actually hung onto their property longer. The Reyes family sold theirs way before we did. We were selling ours like in parcels, like I said, as needed. But you know, we weren't built, as far as I know. I mean, my own family wasn't.
Yeah, people were simply monetizing their holdings.
Yeah, and then my grandfather, you know, De La Peña, he was he was a smart guy. I mean, he bought the house on Lincoln Boulevard in 1905, and he for $150. You know where Denny's used to be? Yeah, it was right across the street from Denny's. Yeah, it's now a muffler shop or something. That was where my dad grew up.
That's the is that Colorado?
Yeah, between Colorado and Broadway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Colorado used to be called Railroad Avenue.
Yeah. Right.
Because that's where the tracks were. So
wow.
Yeah, so my great grandfather, and my grandfather Esteban de la Peña, he worked on the Long Wharf, and Manuel Marquez, who was the oldest Marquez brother, he allowed, and he had, I think, most of the holdings because he was the oldest brother. He allowed the Long Wharf guys to live on the property. So they had like a tent city or something. And I think that's how my grandfather and my grandmother met.
Oh.
Because she was Ramona's daughter. She was living in the canyon. And but when they got married, I mean, they got married in 1897, and then by 1905 they had the house on Lincoln. So I think the canyon was a real wild place. If you've ever talked to Randy Young, Pacific Palisades historian,
I haven't.
There
had
were
the
whorehouses all over the place. Because there's a port.
Right.
So it was a wild place. So I think my grandfather probably said, I don't want to raise my kids here, because they came to Santa Monica.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of reading through Ernie Marquez's book about the Long Wharf, from which he wrote in 1975.
Yeah, it's this book right here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I mean, he was talking about how the Marquezes were ceding or selling right of way because it was the railroad.
Yeah, the Huntington guys.
But they still had the canyon, but it was just, I guess, the beachfront or the right of way that they were selling.
Yeah, and Ramona Marquez, she owned. It's on one of those maps. I believe it was Will Rogers State Beach.
Okay.
I think. I can't. If I remember, I'm going by memory, but I think that's part of what she had. And her sister Francisca had, Huntington Palisades.
Right, and was that what she sold to
Abbott Kinney?
Abbott Kinney?
Yeah, because that Francisca, who's my cousin Sharon's great grandmother, my cousin Sharon Reyes, her great grandmother, she also had her first marriage that didn't work out, and she wound up with this guy Federico Peña from Chile. And he was kind of a fast talker, gambler type guy.
This from family?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So he talked her, I think he talked her into selling, and they went to Chile. And she died there.
Oh.
So she never came back. She died there, and one of her daughters died there too. And then the Marquez family, and then he stayed there, and the other kids, who had grown up here, the Marquez family brought them back.
Huh.
Those are the Peña kids, and people get confused with my family because they're Peña, we're De La Peña, and one of the Peña kids was named Agustin, and I have I have an uncle named Agustin, but it's not the same person. Because I know when Ernie was asking me, he goes, "Well, are you related to the Peñas?" I'm like, "Well, no, we're De La Peña, but we're related to them by marriage." But anyway, people get confused with the two families. Sure. But they were Chilean. I mean, he was Chilean, and it's interesting.
But so
she's the only one that really was gone. She was gone.
Yeah, and she sold that land to Abbott Kinney.
I believe so.
And then left with the husband to
Yeah, they
Chile.
even took their horses on the ship.
Oh, wow.
That's what the story goes.
Yeah, okay.
They just picked up everything and took off, and with all their kids.
And Abbott Kinney turned around and sold it to the Huntingtons.
I believe so.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, it was really
so
really
there was,
interesting. Yeah.
I mean, already in the 1880s, certainly 1890s, there was a lot of real estate. Yeah, because
the wharf was the 1890s. Because, like I said, my grandfather, he was working there in 1895. So.
All right, they were going to turn this into the Port of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So interesting that the Marquezes held on to the canyon without selling out.
Yeah.
You mentioned who was it that had the beach property?
I think it was Ramona.
Yeah. Who would have sold it to Will Rogers? Is that?
No, it's just named Will Rogers State Beach. It's named after him.
He owned.
Well, I don't know that.
No,
he wasn't. She had already died. She died in 1900.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know when that happened.
Yeah,
there was a lot of property disputes. Sharon Reyes' father had a lot of copies of all these disputes that were going on about the land. But that's a whole other thing. I mean, you know, what I've written about the family, you know, in my first draft, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more about the genealogy.
Yeah.
Who married who, you know, that kind of stuff. I wasn't really interested that much in the property stuff. 1890 census got burned in a fire. And,
oh, yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it doesn't exist. And I don't know if it's every state, but it was definitely California. So too bad, because I would have had a lot of information.
Yeah.
The 1900 census, I mean, when you see who was living in the canyon, it was all kinds of people. By that, it was already getting populated. But a lot of those people were living on Marquez land.
Okay.
You know, like they were the Long Wharf folks and whoever else was there, farmers and stuff like that. Then, okay, so then Ramona, Guadalupe Reyes. So after Enriquez was out of the picture, she wound up, like I said, with one of the sons of Isidro, the original Isidro Reyes, who was Francisco Marquez's partner. And his name was Guadalupe Reyes. His name was Saba Guadalupe de Jesus Reyes. But everybody called him Guadalupe. And so anyway, Ramona wound up with him, and they had several children. And one of the sons, Francisco Reyes, he raised whippets, you know, little dogs in Santa Monica Canyon. And it's in that picture that's behind you.
Okay.
One of the dogs is there with him. But anyway, so they had several children. Now, those are cousins that I had no idea, because like I said, my dad just didn't talk about, you know, how many times Ramona was with different men. You know, it was like, that was not talked about. So I had no idea. So when we started doing this research, and I find out that my grandmother Amelia had a whole bunch of half siblings. You know, she had the one from Baker. She had and all these Reyes kids. That and it's real interesting because the youngest Reyes daughter, who was Ramona's daughter, her name was Antonia Reyes. And when I was born, my dad always called her Tia Toña. You know, Tia means aunt. And so they always call her Tia Toña. So I grew up hearing about Tia Toña, but I never met her because she died the year I was born. But anyway, in my baby book, my mom wrote down the list of people, you know, who gave what present. And she gave, I don't remember what she gave me, but she was at my baby shower.
Wow.
So anyway, when we found out, doing the research, that Ramona had this other family with Reyes, and I'm like, oh my God. So no wonder my dad talked about Tia Toña, because she was my grandmother's half-sister. And they were apparently very close. Because after my grandfather died, I don't know why, but my grandmother, the house on Lincoln Boulevard, they rented it out. I don't know if she just didn't want to live there, because that's where he died. He died at home. So they were living on 15th Street, and their next door neighbors were Antonia Reyes and her husband, Leandro Duron, who was also, he's in the Long Wharf picture.
Okay.
So everything's so connected, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then the Durons wound up moving to San Fernando. They lived out there. And then they had two daughters, and so those daughters, Lupe and Lydia, they would come visit every once in a while, but I never knew what the connection was. You know, it's so weird.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you know?
Same thing. I remember not being aware of things when I was a kid.
You just hear these names, but you didn't know what the connections were. So.
Yeah. You know, I'm sort of at the end of.
Okay. Well, I don't.
Just about the end of my.
Well,
questions.
I guess we can just talk about my grandparents then.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like I said, he came to California in 1894, and I'm not sure, but like I said, there were rumors that he had been in the mines, and I don't know exactly where in the mines, but like I said, the organization that he co-founded in Santa Monica, it already existed in Arizona, but they found a local chapter in Santa Monica.
That organization was
Lodge 33, and of Alianza Hispano-Americana. And so when I went online to try to find out about that organization, I found out that the records of the organization are at Arizona State in Tempe. So I emailed them and, you know, told them. And so they actually looked in their records, but they don't have the Santa Monica records.
Oh, okay.
So that was sad.
So we don't know where those are.
No. Mm-mm. But it's on, you know, it's on my grandfather's tombstone that he was founding member.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes, I haven't done it lately, but sometimes one or cousin or another and I will go to Woodlawn and we'll walk around just to see if we recognize any names. So I have found a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 tombstones at Woodlawn Cemetery that have the same thing about Alianza Hispano-Americana. So those guys are members because that's how they got their tombstones.
I wonder, I mean, in terms of finding the records, was that Alianza at all connected to any of the other fraternal organizations in Santa Monica? Or was there...
Well, I think it was mostly just, you know, Latinos.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, it was segregation in those days.
Right. Well, okay, on that subject...
But like, I've gone as far as I could. I mean, like I said, I contacted Arizona State, and I got a really nice librarian who was really, you know, she was Latina too, and she was real interested in it. And she said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have them here." You know, so I said, "Okay, but thanks anyway."
And when you mentioned segregation, first of all, was that something that you experienced?
Well, like, you know, I went to St. Anne's Church school, you know, here on this side of town, Colorado, you know, 20th and Colorado. And that, at that time, that was like part of the barrio. You know, when the freeway was built in the, 59, 60, it's like no accident that it was built in that part of town because that's where the Mexicans lived and the blacks. So a lot of the kids I grew up with were
uprooted.
Yeah, uprooted. So, you know, they're not going to build it on Montana. So, you know. Ew. So yeah. So you know, there was. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, "Oh, you don't have an accent." I'm like, "Well, why would I? I was born here."
So what was it like for your parents?
Well, my parents came here. You know, like my dad grew up here, of course. But when my mom and my grandma came, they had trouble finding a place to live. You know, you know, there were signs that would say no Mexicans.
And did they have to learn English? They probably were already starting.
Yeah, well, you know,
English.
like I said, they lived in El Paso for a while.
Yeah.
My mom went to school there and everything. And then they came to California in the 1920s. And after my great-grandmother died, because she died in El Paso. And my grandmother probably didn't want to leave her there. So after she died, they came. She had a stroke or something. Mm-hmm. And so they came to California with one of my grandmother's brothers. His name was Jesus. And so they lived in, of all places, what's the name of that place that... God, Erin Brockovich, where she did all her oh God, I can't think of the name of it. Hinckley.
Oh, okay.
They actually lived in Hinckley. And the reason how I found this out was after my mom died and I was going through, she had a box of old photographs and there was a photograph of my mom and on the back of it, it said Hinckley, California. And I'm like, what? How did they wind up there? But see, my uncle Jesus, my grandmother's younger brother, his name was Jesus Alarcon, and he worked for the railroad. And so they lived in Watts for a while. They lived in Hinckley. They lived in Barstow. You know, they stayed with Jesus and his wife for a while, and then they pretty much branched off on their own, my mom and my grandma. And so when they were living in East LA, they didn't stay there very long because my grandmother was a single mother with a daughter. And people started gossiping about her, you know, and she didn't like it. Mm-hmm. So they took the red car to Santa Monica to see the ocean. And they loved it. And my grandmother said, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to live here. So they did. They wound up coming here. And my mom would, you know, get these little jobs like at a used furniture store or something. My grandmother was working as a domestic. And so, you know, oh, and then my mom, I don't know where they were going to go, but she wanted to get her hair done. So she called a beauty shop on Montana and made an appointment. And when she showed up, they told her they didn't have any record of her appointment. So you know why that was. Mm. So she came home crying. She told my grandma. My grandma said, if you want to open a beauty shop, I'll help you.
Oh.
So she sent her to the Marinella School of Beauty, which still exists. I see it on the buses sometimes. It says Marinella School, and I'm like, wow, that's where my mom went.
Where, is that downtown?
I think it's downtown. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like over 100 years old by now, probably. So so my mom went there. She got her cosmetology license. I've got it hanging on the wall over here. And she opened a beauty shop. And so in 1931, before she was even married.
Okay.
My parents got married in 1934. So she had her own business.
How did she meet your dad?
Okay, so this is interesting. So, like you were talking about, learning English. Well, my mom's mother had to know English because she was working as a domestic. Okay, so she and other jobs and whatever. So she was going to Samoa at night to learn English, and my dad's mother, who spoke Spanish her whole life, when she was born here, she didn't have to speak English. Her sons were taking care of her. She didn't have to do anything. She didn't have to work. So anyway, but I don't know how, for some reason, she went to Samoa too to learn English. And so the two grandmothers met. And one grandmother said to the other, oh, I have a daughter. And the other one said, oh, I have a son. So anyway, they wound up meeting. And then unbeknownst to them, my mom was also taking classes there, and my dad's youngest sister, Florence, was also taking classes there. So my mom and Florence met, and so everybody met each other like individually, and then they wound up all joining up together and like, oh my God. And so then that's how my mom met my dad. And then, but then, which is real interesting, because the two grandmothers really liked each other and everything. But when my dad's mother realized that my dad was serious about my mom, all of a sudden she's like, I don't want you to marry a woman from Mexico. And like my dad was like, hey, my dad was born in Mexico. What are you talking about? So anyway, they got married anyway.
Well, that was an era when that kind of stuff would happen.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people were wanting to
assimilate. The old Californians, they don't want to have a connection to Mexico, which I don't understand. See, but I have on my family, because my mom was born there, so I feel like I don't get it when they say that, because it's like, well, that's where we all came from, yeah, maybe 200 years ago, but we still came from there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. So they got married in 1934 at St. Monica's.
And well, you never knew your grandfather, so you don't know what that was.
That's one of the big losses of my life.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have met him.
Well, mine died when I was 4. So
yeah, I never knew mine. Well, mine died when my dad was 7 years old. So.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah, that's rough. No, I did meet my mom's dad. I finally did meet him when I was about 13, but I had heard so many. I didn't like him because I knew what he had done to my mom and my grandma. He just abandoned them during the Revolution. So he was in Tijuana visiting, because he was a bigamist. He wound up, he didn't tell. Okay, they never got divorced, okay? And grandma came to the U.S. with mom. And he stayed in Mexico. He never came here to live. He was from Zacatecas. And so he was living in Chihuahua and working there, and that's how he met my grandma. But then after he abandoned them, he went back to Zacatecas. And he took up with this other woman. He never told her that he was already married. So before I was born, during World War II, my mom went down there with one of her cousins to look him up, and so he had never told anybody that he had this daughter already, and my mom really resembled him, so there was no question when these other kids and his wife saw my mother. There was no question that she was his daughter. So the story goes, I don't know how, if it's exaggerated or what, but the story goes that 2 of his daughters had nervous breakdowns and wound up in an asylum because they idolized him, and they found out that he had feet of clay. So,
but you said you met him.
Yeah, because one of his daughters was living. She became a doctor, and she was living in Tijuana with her husband, who was also a doctor, and somehow my mom had stayed in touch with her half siblings. I mean, she wasn't real close with them, but she figured, okay, we have the same father, whatever. So she stayed in touch with them. So she found out through them that he was going to visit his daughter and her husband in Tijuana. So I was 13, and my grandma died when I was 11, and I was really close to my mom's mother. I mean, she was more like my mother than my mother was. So I was very close to her. So Mom said, okay, we're going to go down and meet your grandfather. And I'm like, I don't want to meet him. She goes, you have to meet him. We're all going to meet him. So I was like, okay. So I very reluctantly, 13-year-old, you can just imagine. So, skinny. I was as skinny as a rail. And I was just really had a horrible attitude about meeting this guy. So anyway, go down there. And so he was very short. I was taller than he was. And Mom said, okay, give him a hug. And I was like, probably like a rod was up my back. I mean, I was like, very reluctant hug. And he said to my mother, she doesn't like me. And my mother said, yeah, because she knows what you did to my mother. That's why. So that was the end of that conversation, And so I thought, okay, my mom sided with me. That was fine. I was quite happy that, she realized where I was coming from. And I wasn't just being, an obnoxious kid. So that was, pretty much the extent of my grandfather. I was like, so and his name was Toribio Escobedo.
Okay.
He was another railroad man. So it was like a lot of railroad guys in the family.
Okay.
So Dad, this is another interesting thing about my dad. So he was sort of a jack of all trades. He wound up working for that automotive place, but before that, he had a lot of odd jobs. So I didn't even know this. Okay, so the Santa Monica Evening Outlook. Remember the newspaper? Okay, so in 1975 it was the centennial of Santa Monica. So they put out this centennial edition. And they interviewed my dad for, I don't remember who interviewed him, but somebody did. And so they were talking to Daddy about the old days. And Daddy said, which I was just blown away, that Leo Carrillo, because Leo Carrillo knew everybody because he lived in the canyon, even though we're not related to him, but he knew everybody. Leo Carrillo was instrumental in my dad getting a job with Irvin Cobb. I don't know if you know who he was. He was a really good friend of Will Rogers.
Okay.
And Irvin S. Cobb, he was he had a radio show, and he was like a humorous type guy. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, he was a really good friend of Will Rogers, and I have Will Rogers, the book that his wife wrote, and she talks about Irvin Cobb because he was a good friend. Anyway, so Leo Carrillo introduced my dad to Irvin Cobb, and Daddy became his chauffeur.
Oh.
So during the war, because, jobs, I guess, for, he, like I said, he was too old for the war. So he had this job. He was Mr. Cobb's chauffeur and would drive him to the radio show and everything. So my mom got to go to these live tapings of it. And Mr. Cobb would insist that my mom would sit in the back with him, in the back of the limousine or whatever car it was. And so anyway, when they wound up moving to New York, and, so that my dad didn't have the job anymore. But Mr. Cobb gave our family, I wasn't born yet, but a whole bunch of books, children's books like, Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, all that stuff. So I grew up with all these books that, other kids my age did not have, and they would have to go to the library to get them or something. But I had my own, and they were all from Mr. Cobb.
Did they have his nameplate in them?
No, but they were really nice editions.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty fascinating. So Leo Carrillo was known for doing that. Yeah, so that was nice.
Yeah, that's why they named stuff after him.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
He was much beloved.
He was on the Coastal Commission.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He's the one that talked Will Rogers' widow to donate the property to the state. Yeah. Because,
that's interesting.
Yeah, because otherwise that'd all be developed.
Well, yes.
I hike up there all the time.
So Leo Carrillo talked Betty Rogers into donating it to the state of California. Mm-hmm. Once she was gone. Yeah. When she died.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
But it was all set up beforehand.
Yeah, it was set up, yeah. Yeah, because like I said, he was on the Coastal Commission. He was real good friends with Earl Warren. He was the governor.
Okay.
Yeah, the governor. So, no, he did a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and his father had been the mayor of Santa Monica, Juan Carrillo. Call him JJ. Yeah. Juan Jose Carrillo.
When was he mayor of Santa Monica?
Oh, in the
Oh, this is way back.
Yeah. I guess after it became a city, I think. He was a justice of the peace, too.
Okay.
But I can't remember exactly what year it was.
But he was definitely one of the first, earliest mayors. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and he grew up, Leo Carrillo's father, they were all, in L.A., You know, they're descended from the original Carrillo soldiers from Baja also.
Oh.
There was a Carrillo's, Jose Raimundo Carrillo and Guillermo. They were with the Portolags expedition in 1769. So that, you know, Leo Carrillo's family goes way back. Because that's that first expedition. You know,
which is where supposedly the name Santa Monica started getting kicked around.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really cool. I mean, how these things are all connected. I just love it.
Yeah.
You know? My mom and dad got married in 1934, and then all of us were born and whatever. So my dad's older brother, Agustin, married a woman named Concepcion Alderete, and she was also from El Paso. I didn't know that either. I did a little bit of research on her. And so they only had one daughter, Lucille, and she wound up with multiple sclerosis. So she died. She was in her 40s when she died. She had, I think, 4 or 5 kids. So, and then my dad's younger brother, Ernest, he never married either. He was a pharmacist. He used to work in a drugstore on, I think on 7th in Montana or something. And people, I don't know who the lady was, but some lady took a liking to him. She had money, and she put him through pharmacy school. So he became a pharmacist, and he worked for Save-On Drugs for forever. And they sent him to Calexico because he was bilingual. So he was, you know, down in Calexico, and so they needed a bilingual pharmacist. So that was where he was. So, so anyway, my Uncle Ernest, you know, he would be in Calexico, and then when it was time for vacation, he'd come up to Santa Monica, and he'd live in the old home. And my dad's older sister, Micaela, in that picture there, she was the oldest. And she lived by herself after Grandma died. And then Ernest would come, and Ernest supported her. And so he would come and stay with her, and then, you know, we'd visit him, whatever. But he was very mysterious. So, because he would go back to Calexico. My mom used to always say, "Oh, Ernest, we should go down and visit you." And he'd go, "No, you don't have to come down here." So we always thought, "Oh, what's going on?" Okay. So anyway, he died in 1990. Okay. And he had been supporting Micaela, the sister. She died in 1985, and so he was the last brother to die, and then Florence was the youngest sister. She died in 1996.
You could say something to those long gone. What would it be? Or if you could ask them one question, what would you want them to know? What would you like to know?
Well, I would like to know why my grandfather came here. What drove him to come to California?
He came from
a little town called Padras, Coahuila. Coahuila's a state. Padras it's one of those towns. It's supposed to be very picturesque. I really want to go there someday, but it's in gang territory now, cartel territory. But the town was established in 1598, so it's a very old colonial town. And my De La Peña, my great grandfather De La Peña, Francisco. His name was Francisco De La Peña. He was the mayor of Saltillo, which is the capital of Coahuila. So they were very wealthy landowners. Okay, but my grandfather was born out of wedlock. We didn't know this. This is another thing Daddy didn't talk about. So when we started doing the research, we found this out, and in fact, I couldn't find his baptismal record for the longest time because he was under his mother's name. And the only way I found it was I knew what his older sister's name was, Maria Romana De La Peña. And so by that time they were using the De La Peña name, but the mother's name was Magallanes. That was her last name. So I knew Esteban's birthday was August 14th. So I found this Esteban Magallanes in the baptismal records, and I thought, well, that's interesting. It's the same day, but it's a different last name. So I just didn't think it was him, right? So then I looked up his sister's marriage document, and it said that she was the illegitimate daughter of Joaquin de la Peña, who's my great-grandfather. Didn't have a mother's name, which I thought was real weird. So then I looked at her children's baptismal documents, and it had the names of all the 4 grandparents. And my great-grandmother's name was Maria Micaela Magallanes, which Magallanes is Magellan in Spanish. So I don't know if she was Portuguese. I don't know that deal. We haven't been able to find out too much about her. But that's how I found them. So anyway, he was born out of wedlock. His mother died when he was about 2 years old, Esteban. And my great-grandfather took in the kids, and he never married their mother because I found his death record and said he was a bachelor. But he took in the 3 kids. There's 2 girls and a boy. And he raised them. And I have a picture of him with the kids because I got it from one of my cousins.
Okay.
And so since the De La Peñas were very wealthy, I think because he was born out of wedlock, he was not going to get anything. And I think that's why he came to California. He was only 22 when he got here.
Mm-hmm.
But, I would love to know why, but,
It wasn't necessarily the Long Wharf project that brought him here.
No, I don't think
he came here.
I think he just came. He
because
wanted to get
things were happening here.
He knew he didn't have a future. And which was really interesting is that town where he was born, Padras, it's the same town that Francisco Madero is from. And, he was the author of the Mexican Revolution.
Right.
And there was a connection to that family because Esteban's older sister, wait a minute, let me think this through. Oh shoot, I can't remember now. Well, anyway, there's a connection. The Madero family was the godparents of one of the relatives. I can't remember exactly which one, but we know that they knew each other. So that's even more fascinating to me that the author of the Mexican Revolution is connected to the De La Peñas. But by that time, Esteban was gone. Before the revolution, way before the revolution broke out, he came.
Gone from Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because if he had stayed there, who knows what would have happened? I wouldn't be here. Yeah.
Well, let's not think
so
too
that's
much
two.
about that.
So I have that connection to the Mexican Revolution on that side and on my mom's side.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
Well, that's quite a bit. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So no, thank you for letting me do this because it's a privilege.